What up? What's going on, guys? It is your boy JayDubbs here with a little bit of a game analysis today. We are going to be talking about Bright Memory Infinite, brought to you by FYQD Studios. Quick note to note that it was actually a one-man army team that put out Bright Memory, which is the one preluding this game, and that was an episodic game that they were going to keep going forward with, but they decided to go back, get a little bit of polish, get a little bit more shine on it, and make it a little bit better from what it was to what it could be. This one man was able to get a new team to back him, help him out, and pretty much do what needed to be done in order to bring us today Bright Memory Infinite. This game was kind of overlooked because it came out in between a lot of big games that were coming out. Not a lot, a couple of big games that were coming out at the time. Namely, it came out right after Back 4 Blood, came out before Battlefield 2042, Call of Duty Vanguard, Halo Infinite, and then it was also following Deathloop that came out a couple months prior. So it was in between a couple big players at the time, and so I can understand between it notoriously not having a long story, and because of that also being priced the way it was, why people kind of overlooked it and waiting out for the bigger games. But today I'm going to tackle why this game deserves some recognition, some shine that I feel like it didn't get, and why it keeps me coming back time and time again, regardless of the short story or regardless of any of its other shortcomings. So we're just going to go in and jump right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about are the graphics. And I gotta say, the first thing I noticed when I started playing this game is that it's got some really weird hair textures from what I noticed. Now, the facial animation, while stiff, is a big improvement over the first games. The faces are more interactive and bring the characters more to life than what the last game did. And then it's like your eyes track upward like what the hell is that? Like, it's like they developed the faces and then they just left the hair in this like weird PS2, PS3 transitional state. I mean, would you look at that? Like, really look at it. Look at it! It's ugly, isn't it? Look at it! I just wanted to note that first off. Next, I'm talking about the color palette of the environments, which are much more lush and deep coloration compared to the previous version episodic game that they had originally. And then we're going to really talk about small details like reflections off the gun that are really well done, really nice shine to them. The water droplets, the water textures are really cool on your face, on the screen, in that windy, windy, rainy area. And there's more like that later in the game, and it also does really good job of adding the reflections and the water effects as well. The stones, the leaves, they look really well done, really wet, kind of have that kind of increased immersion for the game and the area that you're in. Rock textures are really well done. They have this earthy degradation that an HO foreign land should have as you're being transported there. I mean, it really helps set the tone of the game, where you are, the wonder, the amazement. It kind of gives you like a Tomb Raider, Uncharted vibe, but on its own landscape and with its own twist. Things like gore and physical damage find a nice medium between not being enough and being too much to where you're not losing any visual acuity at all, but you're still enjoying the visual effects of blood splatter on the screen. You can see it, it's on your face and everything, but like I said, doesn't really get in the way too much. Like you probably seen it in other games do it, where it's there, but it's so much there that you can't even see what you're doing. Last thing I want to talk about as far as graphics are the art style of the characters. Well, not even much the characters, but more so the enemies. The enemies look really unique, really cool. I found myself just in awe, of the design of where they took the characters, how they look. You have this lion thing, I don't even know what they call it, but it looks really cool. Even the normal grunts that you fight look really cool, really unique. And then that also stems to like the mini bosses and then the big bosses. Now, I didn't have any big bosses in this gameplay, but the ones that you do fight later on are really cool. And the first one particularly is one of the antagonists, I'm assuming, of the game, and it really revs up combat, especially if you're playing it on a harder difficulty. So the next part I want to talk about, which is really the nook and cranny, the real meat of this video, is the gameplay. So of course, first off, the disclaimer is that the story isn't really that long. You could beat it in about 7 hours, depending on the difficulty, depending on how fast or how slow you want to get through the game. And honestly, it brings up a good discussion and a quite interesting discussion in games where you're asking yourself, and people will ask plenty of times, what's the proper duration for a game, for a story, for what you're trying to tell, for the experience that you're trying to give the player? What is a proper time frame to make it worth your time, make it worth your money? And honestly, to me, I feel like it just kind of depends on the situation. What kind of story are you trying to tell? Where are you trying to take it? How often or how long are you trying to keep the player engaged for? And are you going to have a sequel? Is this going to be something that's going to be long running? All these questions kind of tie in to the pacing of the game. Now, me personally, I do like a more tightly made game. Games that don't waste your time, that give you a short time frame, but give you everything you need, the meat of everything you need within that short time. Now, I don't know if it's because I'm becoming an adult and I have less time on my hands than I did when I was a child to really dive into games, but I do notice that sometimes with longer games you do end up having too much fluff or too many side stories, or things get too sidetracked from the main story of what you're trying to do, and it can be distracting. So I do appreciate more tightly made games. And despite that, this game kind of left on a non-contextual cliffhanger, which I think is partially because the game is episodic, and so they're going to release more episodes as the game goes on. I can still start to tell you about why this game still keeps me coming back and why it is still so satisfying to play. First and foremost, I want to talk about performance. I easily hit 120 frames on my i7 9700F, 16 gigabyte memory with my 2070 Super. I didn't have many frame rate drops. It probably only dropped about 5 frames, and that was on occasion. The gameplay was very smooth, very impactful. When you shoot weapons, it feels very, very satisfying. The recoil, the physical impact of the enemy, to the gun sounds not sounding too light or too heavy. And to be honest, you'd be surprised about how many whippy gun sounds, shotgun sounds that are out there in games. Play retro games a lot, so I see the beauty in all graphical styles, but it's not just the graphical style, but what you end up doing with it. And I don't think I really would have enjoyed this game as much if it wasn't for the creative art style that they took with the supernatural enemies and the dynamic weather conditions. Thought those were really, really cool. At the end of the day, the replayability may have some stake in multiplayer, but the thing about games, whether they're multiplayer or single player, is that there's one big staple that remains the same to determine replayability for both entities. It comes down to how the game feels and how fun the mechanics are to execute, because it doesn't matter how popular the game you're trying to hype it up to be, how functional it is, how structured the multiplayer is. At the end of the day, if it doesn't feel good to play, if the mechanics don't feel great to execute, the game will die off anyway. We've seen plenty of multiplayer games die off in a matter of months just because it just didn't feel good. Like, it just didn't feel fun. And we've seen single players being able to be revisited for years. Now, this game may have its caveats. It does have graphical touches that it needs, and it has some other things that, the short story, but at the end of the day, does it instill replayability despite that? Yes, it has that in spades because of the smooth performance, the impactful gameplay, and the fun, fluid mechanics that there are to execute. Being able to hike somebody up in the air and slice them to pieces up in the air before they even touch the ground, or switch it up and slice them a little bit and then get with the shotgun or whatever your gun preference is and have fun with those. This isn't even the later gameplay. There's more fun weapons to use, and I didn't even get to show that, and I apologize, but it's still very fun. And then of course the bosses are also very, very fun and very very much a pleasure to fight against. One thing I also appreciate, there aren't a lot of long, drawn-out cutscenes, convoluted filler levels, fetch quests, overuse of puzzles. It's very much boom, 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 boom. It's very tight, gets you from point A to point B, keeps you engaged, keeps you in the action, and that's really what you want at the end of the day. And that's something that I love about this game. It like I said, with the time that it gives you, it keeps you in the meat of everything, meat of the action. Yes, the story doesn't really wound up too much. Like I said, it is episodic, so I conclude that they're going to put out a second episode. This was a cliffhanger. It didn't really do anything particularly crazy with the story, but I think that is also going to be for future episodes as we go on. So this has been my analysis for the game. I still think it's a really great purchase. I think it's something that, especially if you were disappointed with any of the recent FPS releases, that it's something that can at least restore your faith in good FPS gameplay. There is that. So that has been my analysis. If you like what I had to say, maybe give a like, subscribe, or, just make a comment. I love talking about video games. I could do it all day till I am blue in the face. So please come chat with your boy, chat with the team, and we'll see you again next time. Peace out. Keep chasing your dreams, y'all.